brutal lessons of terrorism were passed on numerous times throughout the 20th century. Post-war independence movements across the globe, in Kenya, Malaysia, Vietnam, all used campaigns of terror in their struggles to end colonial rule. And the Jewish state of Israel was born of violence too, in part at the hands of groups that used the tactics of terror. One of these groups was known as the Irgun. Joseph Nachmias joined the Irgun when he was 15, becoming part of the armed resistance that was surfacing in the region.
I had no choice. I had to fight. I had to take arms. Otherwise, I won't have a free state as I've got it today.
Their aim, to force out the British, who ruled the area then known as Palestine, that was heavily populated by Arabs, and create a Jewish state. The Irgun actually had formed in the early 30s as an underground movement. It advocated armed struggle against the British, who earlier in the century had committed to creating a homeland for the Jews. Their objectives gained new urgency following World War II and the Holocaust. Thousands of Jewish refugees from Europe surged toward Palestine, straining the already fragile relations between Arabs and Jews. The British response was to close the borders to the influx.
They used to come towards the Mediterranean and to the shores of Eretz Israel. The British won't let them in. They'll send them back to high seas at the beginning. And many of our brothers were drowned after they escaped from Europe. They were drowned because the British won't let them in. And that's the reason that we thought that we must fight the British.
It made the resistance movements even more determined.
We used to smuggle arms inside fish barrels. There was salted fish barrels, and they used to bring it to my parents' house. My mother used to open and clean the weapons and all, and then they'll take it out. There were German weapons, Italian weapons, from all kinds. Whatever could shoot, this would be all right for us.
The leader of the Irgun was a young Polish refugee named Menachem Begin. Begin advocated violence against the British authorities in Palestine using guns, bombs, and fear. It was a calculated move.
Almost all terrorist campaigns before those in Palestine in the 1940s were localized affairs. But the Jewish terrorists went a step beyond that, and they played to an audience far beyond the footprints of the, let's say, the locus of conflict. But firstly to London, they played directly to the capital to try to influence public opinion further afield in a means to achieve their aims. They also, and I think fascinatingly, played to an audience in New York because the nascent United Nations had just been organized. And their acts of violence were directed or communicated at diplomats designed to put pressure on Britain.
Begin believed that if the resistance could destroy the will and prestige of the British authority, they would depart, leaving the land of Israel to the Jews. Most of the Jewish resistance appealed to the Irgun to stand down. They wanted a diplomatic solution.
The Irgun were described as terrorists not just by the British, who were their enemies, but also by the Jewish community. The focus of their attacks was primarily the British government, its servants, its security forces in Palestine, and they concentrated in the main against British military, intelligence, and governmental targets, not against British civilians.
Begin's Irgun began to plan a major operation against a symbol of British power, the King David Hotel in Jerusalem.
King David Hotel was the headquarters of the British Army and the British regime in Eretz Israel. They were going to find out that there is a pillar in the cellar on the southern part, on the south end of the hotel. If there's an explosion there, all the southern part of the hotel will be demolished. We started scouting the place, and we find out that every morning there's a truck coming from Ramallah with milk containers. We decided this is the way we're going to go in.
The Irgun claims that its violence was aimed at British symbols and that it often warned targets to evacuate before an attack to minimize civilian casualties. Whether a warning went out on the morning of July 22nd, 1946 is still unclear.
We waited for that truck from Ramallah. We overcome them. We took the containers out. We put a milk container, but instead of milk there was explosives. And our guys, they were disguised as Arabs, and they went immediately to the King David Hotel. 22 minutes after we left the place, there was a big explosion, and as planned, all the southern part was demolished, but unfortunately, people died there.
91 people were killed, most of them Arabs. 28 of the dead were British. It was the deadliest operation of its time. The British were stunned, but unyielding. They clamped down on the Irgun, hanging Jewish militants in an effort to deter further violence. The Irgun responded with their own form of terrorist justice.
There are 2 British sergeants in the British intelligence. We kidnapped them, we sentenced them to death, and we told the British they'll hang our guy, we'll hang those 2 sergeants. And we hanged those 2 sergeants in one of the forests there.
The small and the weak, and at that time we were the small and the weak, are allowed to do some things that the strong and the powerful cannot do. And this is the critical difference. If you are small and weak, then necessity has no bounds, and people will forgive you for almost anything. If you are big and strong, then of course you always have the choice. You can either choose to fight or not to fight.
Ultimately, the British chose not to fight. And while there were many factors involved in their final decision to leave, the violence perpetrated by the Jewish resistance accelerated that decision. On May 14, 1948, the new State of Israel was proclaimed.
What I did then, I fought for my country, which was given to me by God. Sometimes in war, even a civilian here and there get hit. I won't call it violence, I call it defending myself. It was necessary to fight just to liberate my country, and that's why I took arms and fought the British.
Probably the Irgun's lasting legacy on the general field of terrorism that goes beyond just the creation of Israel is that Begin himself, he understood the power of the media in transmitting a message. And this was a lesson I think almost every terrorist movement worth its salt since the 1940s has absorbed: the power of communication, the importance of reaching an audience outside the immediate locus of conflict, and transmitting a message as a means to marshal support, apply pressure on your enemy, but also as a means to try to spin the publicity one obtains from violence into a form of attention, then recognition, then respectability, then legitimacy, and then hopefully coming to power.
In fact, the man who marshaled support and gained publicity from violence would later become Prime Minister of Israel and be hailed as a peacemaker. Menachem Begin shared the 1978 Nobel Prize with Egypt's Anwar Sadat for the making of peace between Israel and Egypt. The Irgun's legacy would be a model for liberation movements that followed.